Hello everybody, welcome to the last video for our beloved text, Beloved, where we will pick up where we left off last time, which again was page 220, and go up to the end. So last time we left off, Paul D had confronted Setha about the murder of Beloved, the child, and found out what happened, and he leaves. So Setha and Denver and Beloved kind of have a bond, and they form kind of a little community, at least in the beginning, where they're ice skating and things seem to be going well. However, in this next section, this last section that we read, we see that this bond between Beloved and Setha really starts to unravel, and what started as something that was potentially healing becomes something toxic and destructive, and we watch how both of them seem to be sort of draining each other. Beloved draining Setha explicitly, and we can speculate a lot about sort of what exactly is happening, especially as Beloved, when she's sort of banished by the community, appears to be pregnant at the time. So anyway, getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so Paul D leaves. We get a lot of flashbacks. We have the really important moment for Setha when she goes back to school teacher teaching the people, and he tells them to put Setha's human characteristics on one side and her animal characteristics on the other side, which is, of course, a terrible thing. Especially Setha doesn't quite understand what characteristics mean. She has to ask Mrs. Garner, and she explains it to her. And so, but that sticks in Setha's mind because she comes up later when she's continuing to when she's reflecting on justifying the murder of Beloved, that they will never sort of draw her child up and put her animal characteristics on one side. So that's important. We have a really important passage that I'm probably going to have you guys look at about sort of how white people always look at black people and think that there's the jungle in them, and that they sort of brought the jungle over. And this is in one of Paul D's moments when he's reflecting, and he's pointing out that the jungle was actually put into the slaves by the white people, and it not only, and it grew, and it has infected them, which is a really interesting thing to think about, this concept, especially of like stereotypes and where they come from and how they literally can kind of create these sort of power dynamics that are very destructive based on who holds the power and who enforces the stereotypes. The white slave owners and white culture in general puts forward all this stuff about, this sort of pseudoscience about racial hierarchies and intelligence and all these things. And they think that what they're doing is justifying how they're treating them, but what they're actually doing is, creating a kind of culture that has come back to haunt them, basically. So then we have a series of monologues that are really interesting, and if you're like me, also kind of complicated, especially when we get to Beloved's monologue, which is told in kind of these fragments. There's no punctuation. It's just extra space between the sentences or the fragments. We go from Setha to Denver to Beloved, and then there's kind of one that's almost a dialogue between Beloved and Setha. So we have that. We have Paul D recounts being captured by a school teacher, where we start to learn more of how cruel school teacher is. He watched 6-0 get burned to death, and he learns his worth, which he dwells on a lot. He learns the dollar amount that was paid for him, which I can't imagine sort of how that would affect you. We have Stamp Paid comes to, so Paul D is left. We're back in the present now. Stamp Paid comes to apologize to Paul D for, sort of telling him all this, and now he's gone. And He also says he wants Paul D to know that he was there and he saw what was happening. And he points out that she was trying to out-hurt the herder. That's what he said, that she's not crazy. She loved those kids. And he's saying, I was there. She was not, crazy, which is what Paul D thinks is what it kind of, you get the sense of this, what people in the community sort of started to think. So after that, we get a passage from Denver, and it opens with this line about how Denver had to step off the edge of the world and die because if she didn't, they all would. And then kind of plays out, and we learn that what that means is that Denver needs to go out into the world, which is not something she's really ever done by herself, and find a job because Beloved and Setha are not getting along. And again, their relationship that used to maybe have been healing is now become toxic, and they're not sort of, Setha especially seems to be being drained. And, there's no food and all this stuff. So Denver's like, I need to do something. So she goes out. She goes to Lady Jones. Yeah, Lady Jones, seek for work because Lady Jones used to teach her. So then she tells Lady Jones that her mom's sick, and sort of that kind of grows, and more people learn about, they start to question who Beloved is. And anyway, we learn that the scar that has been mentioned from the very beginning that Denver notices is the scar under her neck where she was killed. So Denver, at some point, it gets real bad. And this book then shifts into, I think, one of the things that Morrison really wants to leave us with, which is this power in the Black community, specifically the women in the Black community. So 30 women all get together, and she makes a point to say they don't all necessarily agree in sort of who Setha is and what she did and whatever, but they can agree on the fact that whatever it is not good. I think Ellie is her name. Yeah. She didn't mind a little communication between the two worlds, but this was an invasion. So they've come to basically exorcise. There's this giant exorcism performed at House 124. They all go up there and they shout or sing, however you want to read it, and that is kind of a good moment to go to. This is on page 308. So Setha hears this. Setha and Beloved are standing there. Again, Beloved seems to be pregnant, and Setha seems to be smaller. So, there's this kind of reversal of roles that is happening. For Setha, it was as though the clearing had come to her. The clearing being that spot where Baby Suggs used to preach and everyone gathered. And another thing, all these people get together mostly because Baby Suggs had such an influence in that community. So that's another rallying cry for them. Had come to her with all its heat and simmering leaves, where the voices of women searched for the right combination, the key, the code, the sound that broke the back of words, building voice upon voice until they found it. And when they did, it was a wave of sound wide enough to sound deep water and knock the pods off chestnut trees. It broke over Setha, and she trembled like the baptized in its wash. So extremely evocative, this just sort of wall of sound hits her, and it's, again, almost supernatural and spiritual with the baptism language. And again, the power of all these voices, again, it's literal power in their voices materially, but also sort of metaphorically, the community coming together to help one of their own. And it seems to work. Beloved, this is when Beloved exits the story mostly. She's dispelled, she's gone, but not before. Coming up on all this is, I can't remember his name, but some guy that Denver was going to work for, and he's coming to the house. And he rides up, and Setha sees him, and it kind of triggers in her that moment back to when it happened previously, and where she saw the white guy riding up, and that's when she went and killed Beloved. This time, she doesn't try and kill any of her children, but she does sort of run at the guy like she's going to kill him. And she runs into the crowd of women, and there's all these bodies. And anyway, they kind of subdue her. I think one of them like punches her in the face. It said, but she stopped. She was going to attack him with an ice pick. One could understand why she would feel that way. So anyway, the end of the story. I mean, we can talk a lot about whether or not it's a happy ending. I mean, that's not a good way probably to talk about the ending of this book. But what we do have is Denver, who has taken on the role of a mother in some way. She's become more responsible than she was in the beginning. Setha seems to be very drained, right? Paul D, he goes back. He decides to go back, and their last interaction is very touching and sad, and I think it's good to point out. This is on page 321. Setha is upset. He's like, what's wrong? He says, she left me. She was my best thing. And I think she said that before, but again, she is the loss of beloved sort of again has sort of just rendered Setha non-functional. And then Paul D has this recollection of Sixo's 30-Mile Woman and what he said about her, how she is a friend of my mind. She gathered me, man. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order. So Paul D sort of has this, like for him, Setha is kind of, he's understanding the depth of the kind of connection that they have. And what he says to her is really kind of profound. He says, only this woman, Setha, could have left him his manhood like that. So again, Paul D's circle kind of completes itself. For a lot of this story, it's been about his manhood. And he feels most sort of like a man when he's with Setha. She sort of preserves that in him. He wants to put his story next to hers. Setha, he says, me and you, we got more yesterday than anybody. We need some kind of tomorrow. He leans over and takes her hand. With the other, he touches her face. Your best thing, Setha. You are. His holding fingers are holding hers. Me. And there's a little kind of meditative passages toward the end. But that's really where we leave our characters, where he's trying to convince Setha that, the past, we can't keep letting it sort of control us, right? Like we have so much yesterday, we've got to have it tomorrow. And he's like, you need to know that you are your best thing, and you need to have a love for yourself, because, she's been letting herself get drained by the past, physically, mentally, spiritually, all these things, which again was sort of literalized in the character of Beloved. And we're unsure, Setha seems, how you read her, me, like questioning, like she doesn't understand, or maybe she does understand and it's a realization moment. But, we don't know. So that's the story. Again, there's so much more to say. Again, I am no expert on this novel or Morrison, but we got through it. Again, I mentioned at the top that this book is dealing with all kinds of things, and in this class, which again has been about violence, this book has really dealt with sort of the ramifications of sustained violence and also emotional violence in a way that we haven't dealt with. So again, themes like trauma, memory, storytelling. Here we really get this community theme that comes out, which has kind of been there all along. If we think back, again, we see Baby Suggs, how she sort of gathered a community, and Paul D and the people that were on Sweet Home, how they were a community unto themselves and how it was disrupted and all of these things. And it's about race, obviously, in a very big way. It's also about motherhood in a big way. It's about a lot of things. I mean, that's one of the things that makes a text quote unquote literature is the amount of depth it has, that you can continually go to it and mine several things out of it because it was created with such sort of intent, um, you know. So anyway, so that is Beloved. That's all I have to say about it. So for next week, we are moving right along to Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which some of you might have read in high school. A perennial high school read, radically different in tone from Beloved. Vonnegut is often very funny in kind of a dry humor sort of way. He's known as kind of a satirist or a postmodern writer. So anyway, get going on that. For the final book recommendation for Beloved, I've given you a couple for you to occupy your time during all this craziness. So the last one that I'll leave you with, so like I said, Beloved is very much about motherhood. And if you would like books about motherhood or that deal with especially young mothers who are sort of struggling to know how to be a mom when there's not like a support system in place to, tell them how to do that. Another book, this is very different from Beloved, but one that is very explicitly about motherhood that I like a lot is called Born by Jeff Vandermeer. Now, this is not a historical book. This is a science fiction book, very much a science fiction book. Jeff Vandermeer is one of the great science fiction writers, really just writers, period, in my opinion. This came out not terribly long ago. Let's see. 2017. He just had kind of a pseudo sequel come out called Dead Astronauts. It's also incredible. He wrote what's called the Southern Reach trilogy, starting with the first one called Annihilation. You may have seen or heard of that. There's a film made that came out a few years ago with Natalie Portman called Annihilation. Anyway, Born is amazing. It's about a woman named Rachel, and she's in this like ruined city. There's this sort of ominous company that dabbled in all sorts of like biotechnology and created all sorts of weird things. And she finds this organism that she calls Born, and she sort of becomes its mother, basically. So it's a story about motherhood. It's a story about the environment and humanity's impact on the environment, and all of these things. It's really good. Again, if you like the theme of motherhood that's in Beloved, Born is another great book about Beloved, although, again, not about Beloved, about motherhood. Again, it is not a sort of historical realist drama. It is a science fiction book. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to email me. I'll put the discussion board questions up soon, and you'll have those for Friday. So in the meantime, stay safe, stay sane, all that good stuff. But we'll see you guys next time.